Gone in the Fog, a Helena Monroe story. Chapter 1. A Whisper at Midnight. Helena Monroe was staring at the lingering smoke from her late-night coffee when her phone buzzed, displaying a name she knew only in passing. Detective Marcus Gray. They had shared a few tips over the years, but never collaborated in full. Curiosity sparked as she answered. "Monroe?" she said, keeping her voice even. "Helena? It's Gray." He sounded tense. "We've got a situation at Fog Hollow Bridge, a missing person. The chief wants your expertise. I'm sending you the address." A few seconds later, her phone vibrated with a text. Missing person Fog Hollow Bridge. Car found abandoned. No further details. Yet it was enough to make Helena pull on her coat. Fog Hollow Bridge was an hour outside the city, notorious for accidents and haunting local folklore about lost travellers. She locked her office and drove off, the city lights fading as she hit the desolate highway. The route wound through dense pines and rolling fog, each mile growing darker. Something about the name Fog Hollow Bridge made her uneasy. Detective Gray's voice had a tinge of urgency she rarely heard in cops who usually brushed her off. By the time Helena arrived, it was well past midnight. 2 patrol cars formed a makeshift barricade in front of the old stone bridge, red and blue strobes piercing the white veil of mist. She parked behind them, stepping out into damp, frigid air. Fog clung to the arches of the bridge, swirling around the tires of a deserted sedan still parked along the shoulder, its driver's door wide open. Detective Gray broke away from a cluster of uniformed officers to greet her. His eyes bore the exhaustion of a man who'd been on the clock far too long. "Thanks for coming." Helena nodded, scanning the scene. An old sedan, likely 10 years out of date. The front seat light was on, illuminating a leather purse on the passenger side. No sign of a struggle or forced entry. "Name of the missing? Madeline Reeves," Gray answered. 25 years old, left her parents' estate around 9 p.m. to clear her head. She never came back. A trucker found this car abandoned an hour ago. We got a partial 911 call from Madeline just before that. Very short. She whispered, "He found me." Then silence. "He," Helena echoed, a shiver of interest. "You think it's someone she knew?" Gray shrugged, the tension in his shoulders evident. "Family claims she had no enemies, but Madeline seemed on edge, according to them." Helena approached the sedan, shining a small flashlight. The keys were still in the ignition, the engine cold. Footprints dotted the damp pavement, but the swirling fog made them nearly impossible to read. She bent down, noticing the phone's battery lying next to a chalk marker. "What happened here?" "That's the phone's battery," Gray clarified. "We found the phone casing inside the car. Battery popped out on the pavement. No idea why." Helena tucked her hair behind her ear. Could be a scuffle, or she yanked it out on purpose. Hard to say without more clues. "Where's the father?" "He's at the station, leaning on the chief to move faster. The Reeves family is influential." Gray exhaled. "We called you in because we can't figure out if this is a kidnapping, a runaway, or something else entirely." A uniformed officer approached, rubbing his arms against the cold. "Detective, we did a sweep along the bridge. No sign of anything in the water. No tracks leading into the woods. It's like she vanished. Or was taken," Helena said softly, scanning the black water beneath the bridge. Fog drifted over the surface like a spectral curtain, hiding who knows what. She felt the familiar prick of intuition. Something about Madeline's last words, "he found me," suggested a personal threat, not random violence. Gray gestured for Helena to follow him back toward the police cars. "We'll have you talk to the parents. Maybe you'll catch something we missed." The mother's in shock, the father's fuming, but neither is offering any solid leads. Where does Madeline live? She moved back in with her parents a few months ago. Supposedly she'd been living on her own, then just returned. No official explanation. Helena tucked away that detail. Something spooked her enough to come home, and apparently to run again. Gray hesitated. A neighbor heard her crying in the backyard last week. They said she looked terrified. We filed a wellness check but found no sign of wrongdoing. Maybe we missed something. Helena studied Gray's somber expression. Okay, let's start with the parents. Meanwhile, I want to see if the phone's last known coordinates or call logs give us anything else. And check if the local gas stations have cameras. Maybe she passed by on her way here. Gray gave a tight nod. I'll set you up at the station. Just help us get a handle on this. The family wants results now. The swirling fog closed in, the deserted sedan behind them feeling like a silent witness to a crime no one had seen. Helena swallowed the lump in her throat, determined to cut through whatever secrets had forced Madeline to vanish. She looked out over the side of the bridge one last time, the dark water a mirror reflecting only emptiness. Madeline Reeves was out there, frightened enough to whisper a final call for help. Helena made a quiet promise. She'd unravel who he was and why Madeline believed he'd found her, even if it meant diving into whatever haunted hush the fog refused to reveal. Chapter 2. Into the family's world. Helena arrived at the Reeves family home just before dawn. The estate, perched atop a manicured slope, radiated old money, a sprawling driveway lined with lanterns, carefully trimmed hedges flanking a fountain in the courtyard. The scale of wealth clashed with the desperation Helena expected inside. She parked near the front entrance, taking a breath before knocking. A butler opened the door, his expression tight with concern. Ms. Monroe, I presume? Detective Gray said you'd be coming. He stepped aside, and Helena entered a grand foyer crowned by a crystal chandelier. The quiet hush in the corridors felt heavy, as though the house itself held its breath. The butler led her to a lavish sitting room, where Mr. and Mrs. Reeves waited, both looking haggard despite impeccable attire. Mrs. Reeves clutched a tissue, eyes red from crying. Mr. Reeves paced restlessly, his tailored suit rumpled. He whirled when Helena entered. You're the private investigator? Helena inclined her head. Yes, sir. Detective Gray asked me to help. He raked a hand through his silver hair, frustration simmering in his voice. My daughter's missing. The police have no answers. Why can't they find her? Helena approached calmly. I'm doing everything I can. Let me start by asking you what Madeline's state of mind was before she left. Mrs. Reeves dabbed her eyes, voice trembling. She was anxious. She came back home a few months ago, said she needed to feel safe, but she wouldn't tell us exactly why. Did she mention anyone threatening her? Helena asked, scanning their reactions. Mr. Reeves shook his head. No, but she was on edge. At night, she'd pace the halls, jump at shadows. My wife tried pressing her for details, but Madeline brushed it off. She insisted we stop prying. Helena nodded. What about her friends, old co-workers? Did she keep in touch? Mrs. Reeves faltered. She barely went out, rarely used her phone. She'd take late drives, sometimes returning after midnight. We worried she might be meeting someone secretly, but she never said. A memory from the bridge returned to Helena, the phone battery lying on the pavement. If Madeline had tried to hide her calls, removing the battery might have been a tactic. Did she recently change numbers? Mr. Reeves scowled. She swapped SIM cards a few times. I paid her phone bills, but she insisted on privacy. I indulged her. I thought if she felt cornered, she'd run again. Helena's gaze flicked to Mrs. Reeves, still trembling. Did Madeline mention a name? A he? Mrs. Reeves clutched her tissue. No, but there was a night last week. I heard her in the backyard whispering on the phone, "He won't find me here." A shiver passed through Helena. Madeline believed someone was chasing her. Do you recall anything else she said? Mrs. Reeves shook her head. I went to check on her, but she ended the call. She looked terrified. I tried asking her what was wrong. She just said, "I'm dealing with it, Mother." Then she walked back inside. The father's pacing intensified. Whoever this man is, he's responsible for my daughter's disappearance. I want him found. I want my daughter safe. Helena approached, her tone firm but reassuring. We're on the same page. I'll need a list of any close friends, ex-boyfriends, old colleagues, anyone who might have reason to track her. Mrs. Reeves nodded, pulling out a small notepad. I've listed some names I knew, but I'm not sure how updated they are. Taking the notepad, Helena scanned the scribbled entries. Friends from college, a few exes, a rumoured fiancé from her time away. The fiancé's name was circled with a question mark. You don't know him, Mr. Reeves sighed. We heard rumours she got engaged last year. She never confirmed it. We suspect it didn't end well. His eyes flickered with worry. If that man was controlling her, maybe he threatened her. It was a lead. Helena pocketed the list. Thank you. I'll start there. Also, I'd like to check Madeline's room, see if she left any clues behind. They led her upstairs to a spacious bedroom overlooking the estate's gardens. Everything looked meticulously arranged, a floral bedspread, a desk with neatly stacked books. Nothing screamed alarm. But Helena's keen eyes caught small signs, pen scribbles in the margins of a notepad, a wad of tissues in the trash, a locked drawer in the nightstand. Does she usually lock her drawer? Helena asked softly, testing the handle. Mrs. Reeves pursed her lips. I'm not sure. Possibly. Helena pulled a small pick from her bag. Can I open it? Of course. Go ahead. A subtle twist. The drawer clicked open, revealing a single photograph. Madeline beside a handsome man on a sunny beach, both smiling. No label, no date. The man's face was partially turned away. She held it up. Recognize him? Mrs. Reeves shook her head. Mr. Reeves's frown deepened. I've never seen that man in my life. Helena studied the grin on Madeline's face. Genuine happiness captured in that moment. She was close to him, whoever he is. This could be the fiancé or some friend. He might be the one she feared, or the one protecting her. Sliding the photo into a protective sleeve, Helena closed the drawer. I'll keep you updated. If you remember anything else, call me anytime. As she headed downstairs, Mr. Reeves touched her arm. Please, bring her back. Helena nodded solemnly. I'll do my best. The morning light crept over the estate's manicured lawn as Helena stepped outside. The quiet beauty felt jarringly at odds with the desperate situation. She slid into her car, determined to chase the leads on Madeline's relationships, starting with the rumoured fiancé. But a nagging thought lingered. Madeline had come home to feel safe. Who or what had driven her to leave her independent life in the city? And now, she'd left her car behind in the fog. The question hammered at Helena's mind. If she'd run, why the 911 call? If she'd been taken, how had the perp left no trace? Cranking the engine, Helena glanced at her phone. Detective Gray had sent a text. The trucker who found the car is available for questioning. His name's Roy Gallagher. Another lead. Another piece of a puzzle swirling in the fog, she typed back. On my way. The investigation was just beginning, and Helena had the uneasy sense it would only get darker from here. One thing was certain. Madeline Reeves's entire world had shattered in the hush of a single night, and Helena had to race against shadows to find her before it was too late. Chapter 3. Trucker's Tale. Helena Monroe drove into the small truck stop off Route 17, scanning the lot for the rig belonging to Roy Gallagher. Detective Gray had texted the plate number, and sure enough, she spotted a hulking blue semi with an old coffee-stained teddy bear hanging in the windshield. The driver was leaning against the cab, arms folded, gaze distant. She parked and walked over, noticing the lines of fatigue under the man's eyes. He offered a curt nod, adjusting his cap. You the P.I. Gray mentioned? Helena Monroe, she said, extending a hand. Roy Gallagher, right? He shook her hand. Yeah. You want to ask about that girl I found? Madeline Reeves? Helena nodded. You discovered her car on Fog Hollow Bridge. Can you tell me exactly what you saw? Roy sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose as if recalling a bad memory. I was heading east, just after midnight. Thick fog. Hardly any visibility. I see this sedan parked with its flashers off, which is weird. I thought maybe it stalled, so I stopped behind it. Did you notice anyone near the car? Helena prompted, pulling out a small notepad. He shook his head. Nope. The door was open, purse on the seat, engine off. I called out a few times, but no answer. Then I saw the phone inside. The battery was missing. Spooked me, you know? Felt like someone left in a hurry. And you called the police? Roy nodded. Yeah. I dialed 911. The operator said they'd send a squad car. I waited maybe 10 minutes, shining my flashlight around. Didn't see a soul. The fog was so thick I could barely see my own truck. Helena made a note. Did you hear anything? Another car? Footsteps in the fog? Roy considered. I thought I heard. Footsteps, maybe, on the other side of the bridge, but could have been my imagination. Or the wind. It was unsettling, that's for sure. And how did you find out her name? He sighed. The cop who arrived told me the car was registered to Madeline Reeves. I left after they took my statement. Helena scanned his face, searching for any sign of deception. Nothing suggested he was lying. You said you felt spooked. Why? Roy hesitated, then shrugged. Something about that place. I've driven that route for years, always at night. I've seen deer, runaways, you name it. But that bridge? It felt like I was on another planet. No noise, no wind. Just emptiness, and that abandoned car. She closed her notepad. Thanks, Roy. If you recall anything else, any detail that might help, here's my card. She handed it over. He took it, fingers trembling slightly. I hope you find her. No one deserves to just vanish like that. Helena nodded, walking back to her car. The trucker's recollection confirmed the eeriness at Fog Hollow Bridge, but no new evidence. The footsteps he imagined could be real or just the wind. Still, it hinted someone might have fled on foot or watched from the darkness. Her phone buzzed. Gray again. We ran the fiancé rumor. A name came up. Derek Morris. Possibly engaged to Madeline last year. No known address. Parents live 2 towns over. Helena typed a quick reply. Thanks. Heading there now. The Morris residence was a modest suburban home, a stark contrast to the Reeves estate. Helena parked along a quiet street, lined with picket fences and children's bicycles. She rang the bell, uncertain if Derek actually lived there. A middle-aged woman in a floral apron answered, startled to see a stranger. "Hello, Mrs. Morris. I'm Helena Monroe, a private investigator working with the local police on Madeline Reeves's disappearance. I'd like to speak with Derek if he's here." Her face paled. "Derek? He doesn't live here anymore." Helena offered a gentle smile. "I just have a few questions." He and Madeline were rumored to be engaged. Mrs. Morris sighed, opening the door. He was. They dated for a year, got engaged, but it ended. He moved out, said he was traveling for work. She led Helena into a tidy living room. "We rarely see him now. Do you know why they broke up?" Helena asked softly. She shook her head. "Something happened, but Derek wouldn't say. He seemed angry after, said Madeline betrayed him. I tried to get him to open up, but he just packed and left." "And Madeline? Did she ever come around or call?" Mrs. Morris wrung her hands. "No, not after that. We liked her. She was sweet, but there was always a tension between them. Something about her not being honest." Helena's curiosity piqued. "Do you know where Derek is now?" "No, I'm sorry. He only calls occasionally. Last time he said he was living near the city, but didn't provide an address." A short silence followed. Mrs. Morris's eyes brimmed with concern. "Is Derek in trouble?" "He's not a suspect yet," Helena assured. "We're just checking all leads. Madeline's missing. We suspect she was scared of someone." Mrs. Morris clutched her apron. "Derek was hurt by the breakup, but he's not cruel. He wouldn't abduct anyone." Helena nodded, leaving the woman her card. "If Derek calls, please let me know. Madeline's family is desperate." Mrs. Morris walked her to the door. "I hope you find her. No one should vanish without answers." Helena returned to her car. So Derek might harbor resentment, but abduction? She needed more than the ex's scorned lovers scenario. The mention of not being honest was intriguing. Could Madeline have been hiding a secret from Derek that led her back home? Her phone chimed again. Gray had found an old friend of Madeline's who'd agreed to talk. Another puzzle piece. Helena pulled away from the Morris house, mind churning with possibilities. If Derek wasn't the immediate suspect, who else could he be? Glancing at the passenger seat where she'd tucked the photograph of Madeline with an unidentified man, Helena wondered if Derek was that man, or if someone else had slipped into Madeline's life, a bigger threat lurking in the fog. As the day's light began to brighten the horizon, she felt no relief. Madeline was still out there, and time was running out to uncover the truth behind her last whispered words. Chapter 4. Friends and Fears. Helena arrived at a small cafe in downtown Oakwood, a cozy place with warm lighting and a few early morning patrons. Detective Gray had arranged for Madeline Reeves's old college friend, Claire Thompson, to meet here. A uniformed officer stood by the entrance, giving Helena a brief nod. Inside, she spotted Claire hunched over a mug, her brown hair pulled into a loose ponytail, eyes rimmed with apprehension. Helena took a seat across from her, offering a careful smile. "Claire, I'm Helena Monroe. Thanks for agreeing to see me." Claire forced a nod, stirring her coffee absently. "I'll do anything to help find Maddie." Helena eased into the chair. "You two were close?" "In college, yes. We stayed in touch sporadically after, but she withdrew a lot. Maddie became paranoid, I guess." Helena leaned forward. "Paranoid how?" Claire glanced around, as if worried someone might overhear. "She'd call me at odd hours, talk in circles about changing her number, about someone tracking her. I thought it was maybe an abusive ex, but she never named him." "Did she mention Derek Morris?" Claire frowned, shaking her head. "No. She said she was engaged, but broke it off. She was more worried about something from her past catching up to her." She never gave details, just that she had to come home for protection. Helena scribbled a note. Did she ever hint at having legal troubles? A stalker, maybe? Claire exhaled, frustration plain. She was cagey. Said if I pressed her, she'd stop calling. So I backed off, hoping she'd trust me eventually. Her voice wavered. Then, about 2 weeks ago, she left me a voicemail. A snippet, maybe 2 sentences. What did she say? Claire closed her eyes, recalling. I think he's in town. He followed me once before. If you don't hear from me, something's wrong. Then she hung up. A chill swept over Helena. Did you show that voicemail to the police? I tried calling Maddie right after, but she didn't respond. By the time I considered the police, she texted me. False alarm. I'm safe now. So I let it go. Helena gripped her pen tighter. You still have that voicemail? Claire nodded. I can forward it to you. She tapped on her phone, sending the audio file to Helena's number. I wish I'd done more. Helena placed a comforting hand on her arm. We'll use it to track whoever she feared. If you remember anything else, any name she dropped, a detail about that threat, call me. Claire hesitated, biting her lip. She once mentioned a city Granville, something about an incident a few years back. She said she never wanted to return there. Granville. Helena's mind flicked through maps. Granville was 2 hours away, a mid-sized city. Could Madeline have made an enemy there? Did she live in Granville? For a bit, after college. She never told me why she left so abruptly. Helena gathered her notes, standing up. This helps, thank you. Claire's eyes glistened with concern. Please find her. Outside, the uniformed officer shot Helena a questioning glance, but she just shook her head, indicating no breakthroughs. Her phone buzzed. Detective Gray, again. Got a tip from an anonymous caller claiming to have seen Madeline at a motel on Route 22. Probably a hoax, but we're checking. Helena typed back a quick, understood. I'll follow up on my end. Later, at the local station, Helena sat in a cramped desk area the chief had temporarily assigned her. She replayed Claire's voicemail from Madeline, hearing the fear in her voice. He followed me once before. If you don't hear from me, something's wrong. The line crackled. Then silence. Madeline had been certain this man was relentless. But who? She typed Granville incident into a search program, scanning for relevant news. Nothing jumped out. Granville had its share of crimes, but no major case matching Madeline's timeline. She tried searching Madeline's name, plus Granville. Still no hits. Frustration gnawed at her. She considered that Madeline might have used an alias, or the incident never made the news. Her phone buzzed. Gray again. Hoax. No sign of Madeline at the motel. Dead end. Helena rubbed her temples. A voice cleared behind her. She turned to see Mr. Reeves, escorted by a lieutenant. His face was drawn, eyes bloodshot. Any progress? He demanded, voice cracking. Helena stood, gently leading him away from the bustling main room. Sir, we have leads a possible link to an old situation in Granville. I'm working with Detective Gray to track that angle. He clutched a folded paper in his hand. My daughter is out there, alone, afraid. I can't sit still. He handed her the paper. A list of politicians, law enforcement, even local businesses. I wrote down people who might hold grudges against me, just in case. Helena scanned the names. Rivals, ex-business partners, local power players. None jumped out as a personal threat to Madeline. I appreciate this, sir. I'll look into it. He swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "I just want my girl home," she nodded solemnly. "We'll do everything we can." That evening, Helena returned to her temporary desk, burying herself in the puzzle. Madeline's fiancé lead had fizzled. Her friend's account pointed to an unnamed threat from Granville, and the father's enemies seemed too tied to politics, not personal vendettas against Madeline. As the station cleared out for the night, Helena found herself poring over an old map of Granville's neighborhoods. If Madeline had lived there and fled abruptly, there might be a landlord or ex-roommate who could recall something. She scribbled a plan for the next day, track down addresses, check local records, see if Madeline filed a restraining order. "He found me." The words echoed in her mind as she closed her notes. Whoever this man was, he had a hold on Madeline enough to make her uproot her life, hide with her parents, and then vanish a second time. Tomorrow, Helena would begin unraveling that hold. For now, she stepped outside, the cool night air biting her cheeks. Fog drifted along the street, a reminder of Fog Hollow Bridge and the chilling emptiness that devoured Madeline's presence. Shoving her hands into her coat pockets, Helena breathed in the damp air, vowing she'd light up the shadows that threatened this young woman. The fog might hide footprints and secrets, but it couldn't silence the truth forever. Chapter 5. Shadows in Granville. Early the next morning, Helena set out for Granville, armed with little more than a hunch. She had a handful of addresses gleaned from public records, places Madeline might have rented. The drive took her past rolling hills, gradually merging into urban sprawl. Granville was a mid-sized city with a bustling centre and run-down outskirts. She started downtown, checking a coffee shop rumoured to be Madeline's old workplace. The manager, an older woman named Denise, wrinkled her brow at the mention of Madeline's name. "Oh, yes, she worked here a couple of years ago. Quit suddenly, though. Claimed she got a better job, but I recall she seemed jumpy those last few weeks." "Jumpy how?" Helena asked, leaning on the counter. Denise frowned. She'd glance over her shoulder a lot, like she expected someone to barge in. Asked to change her shifts to midday, said nights felt unsafe. "And did anyone ever come in looking for her?" Denise shook her head. "Not that I remember, but she was definitely spooked by something. She left without even picking up her last paycheck." Helena nodded, leaving a card. "If you think of anything else, call me." Her next stop was a small apartment complex on the edge of downtown, one of the addresses linked to Madeline a year and a half ago. The worn facade and peeling paint suggested lower rent housing. Helena knocked on the property manager's door, introducing herself as a PI looking for info on a former tenant. The property manager, a stout man named Milo, flipped through a dog-eared ledger. "Madeline Reeves? Yeah, I remember her. Moved in around March, left after about 6 months. She paid on time, but left in a hurry, didn't even get her deposit back. Do you recall any troubles? Visitors who might have been unwelcome?" Helena asked. Milo scratched his chin. She was quiet, but one night, neighbours complained about shouting. She never filed a complaint, so I let it go. The day after, she gave me her notice. A spark of interest lit in Helena's mind. "Did you see who she was arguing with?" He shrugged. "Never saw the person. But I heard a male voice. They were yelling in the hallway. By the time I got out there, it was empty." "Any detail on what they argued about?" Milo hesitated. "Heard her say something like, 'You promised I'd be safe.'" Then it went quiet. Safe. That word again. Helena's pulse quickened. She thanked Milo, leaving with the sense Madeline had placed trust in someone only to feel betrayed or endangered. Detective Gray texted midday. "We ran the father's list of potential enemies. Nothing personal pointing to Madeline. still searching for other leads. Helena typed back, "Granville angle might be key." She left abruptly after a fight with an unknown man. Gray. Any luck hiding him? Helena sighed, typing, "Not yet. We'll keep digging." She continued her search, checking a second address. No luck. Tenants had turned over multiple times since. Tired and hungry, she grabbed a quick sandwich at a deli, scanning her phone for any mention of a Granville incident that might tie to Madeline. Still nothing concrete. Then, an idea struck her. She recalled that sometimes women running from danger might have filed local protective orders. She headed to the Granville courthouse, politely persuading a clerk to let her check public records for any such filings by or against Madeline Reeves. After an hour, she found it. A sealed protective order from last year, vaguely referencing harassment. The clerk's eyes flicked up when Helena asked for details. "I'm sorry, Ms. Monroe. That record is sealed by the judge. I can't give specifics." Helena felt a surge of frustration. "Is there any name associated? A man's name?" The clerk shook her head apologetically. "All sealed. The judge deemed it private for the petitioner's safety." This was enough to confirm Madeline had reason to fear someone in Granville. She left the courthouse, mind racing. A sealed protective order implied a serious threat. Was it an ex, or someone else in a position of authority? As dusk fell, Helena received a call from Detective Gray. "I got a potential break, Monroe. A co-worker at Madeline's old job in Oakwood recognized the fiancé's name, Derek Morris, right? Says she overheard Madeline mention a bigger danger than Derek. Something about the man who knows her secrets." Helena frowned. Could it tie to the protective order in Granville? Maybe. Also, a neighbor from Fog Hollow came forward. She claims to have seen a hooded figure lurking near the bridge a week ago. She thought it was a drifter. Now she's not so sure. Helena rubbed her temples. "So we have a fiancé who's not the real threat, a protective order in Granville, and a hooded figure near the bridge. Perfect." She paused. "What about the phone? Tech team find anything? Working on it?" "The missing battery complicates it, but they're trying to recover partial data from the phone's memory. Keep me posted." Helena ended the call, pondering. If Madeline's protective order was sealed, it suggested the man might hold some official position or influence. Could he be a cop? A legal official? Or was he a violent criminal she once witnessed? Returning to her car, Helena resolved to talk to that neighbor near Fog Hollow. If someone was stalking the area, maybe he'd shown up more than once. The puzzle's pieces were scattered, but each new scrap of info shaped the silhouette of a dangerous figure in Madeline's life, a figure she believed had found her at last. Chapter 6. A Hooded Figure. The next day, Helena set out for a small cluster of houses near Fog Hollow Bridge. The road was barely paved, lined with overgrown ditches and old mailboxes. She located the neighbor who claimed to have seen a hooded figure, a middle-aged woman named Karen Douglas. Karen's house was a modest ranch with a battered truck in the driveway. Karen greeted Helena at the door, a certain skittishness in her eyes. "Detective Gray said you might come." Helena offered a gentle smile. "Thank you for agreeing to talk. You saw someone near the bridge before Madeline disappeared?" Karen ushered her into a cluttered living room, nodding. "About a week ago, late at night, I heard rustling outside. When I peeked out my window, I noticed a man in a dark hoodie walking along the edge of the bridge. He stood there for a while, just staring. Could you see his face?" She shook her head. "No, the fog was too thick. He was tall, I think. He moved like he was angry or anxious, pacing sometimes. Helena took notes. Did he return any other night? Karen frowned. I can't be sure. 2 days later, I swear I heard footsteps again, but I didn't dare look. That bridge just feels off. What time was that? Always past midnight. Helena thanked her, heading outside. The possibility that Madeline's stalker had staked out the bridge for days chilled her. If he was methodical, he might have planned to intercept her. But how did he know she'd show up? Back at the station, Detective Gray waved her over. Got news. The tech team recovered fragments from Madeline's phone. She had a text chain with an unknown number, messages referencing Granville and the arrangement. Helena's brow furrowed. Arrangement? Gray nodded. She wrote, I did what you asked in Granville. You promised I'd be safe. If you don't keep your word, I'll tell the truth. Then the number replied, Don't threaten me. It's not safe to talk on this line. A swirl of theories swept through Helena's mind. So Madeline did something in Granville for this person, possibly testified or helped cover something up. She wanted assurance he'd protect her. Instead, he's threatening her silence. Gray tapped a pen on his desk. Which means she wasn't running from an ex, but from a powerful associate. The question is, who? Helena recalled the sealed protective order. Could it be that same man? A cop, official, or criminal with connections? He used her, then discarded her. Gray grimaced. We tried to trace the number. Burner phone. Dead end. Helena exhaled, scanning the partial texts. She threatened to tell the truth about something. That indicates a serious secret. Maybe a crime she witnessed or abetted. Gray lowered his voice. The chief is worried. Madeline's father is leaning on us harder. We need a break. Helena's phone buzzed. Another message from Claire. Found an old group photo from college. Maddie wrote, Never again, on the back, referencing Granville. Sending it now. The attached image showed Madeline, Claire, and 2 other people. A tall, dark-haired man with a lopsided grin caught Helena's eye. Turning the phone to Gray, Helena said, We should ID the others in this group. One might be the he, she texted. Gray nodded. We can do a quick facial recognition on campus yearbooks. Let's see if we get a match. He paused, glancing at Helena. You're thinking the man in the group photo could be the same person behind the arrangement? It's a guess, but it's better than nothing. Later that evening, Helena was back in the station, sipping stale coffee. Gray hovered over a computer, scanning files from the university. After an hour, he let out a grunt. Got a match for the dark-haired guy. Keith Radner. He attended for 3 years, left abruptly, no known degree. We have no further records. Did he vanish or transfer? Gray shrugged. No clue. I'll see if we can find him in public databases. Meanwhile, Helena dialed Claire, double-checking if she recalled a Keith Radner from college. Claire answered, her tone wary. Keith? Yes, he and Madeline were close friends, maybe more before he dropped out. She never talked about why he left. Any rumors? Claire paused. Just that he got involved in something shady off campus. Drugs, maybe? Or working for a private security group? Everything was hush-hush. Helena sensed a lead. Could he be the man from Granville? The one who convinced her to do something? Claire sighed. I can't confirm. She never told me. Helena ended the call, updating Gray. Keith might be the missing link. If he had her do something illegal or borderline, she might have needed that sealed protective order to keep him away. Gray typed Keith's name into a state database, scanning. We've got a partial match to a Keith Radner associated with a security firm in Granville. The firm's defunct now. No forward address. They specialized in private enforcement, vigilante stuff. Helena sat back. This is bigger than a simple romance gone bad. Madeline might have gotten tangled up in criminal or vigilante activity. Gray rubbed his temple. Or she witnessed something only Keith could help her bury. Then he turned on her. Before Helena could reply, her phone rang. Mr. Reeves. She answered, hearing panic in his voice. I got a call from Madeline's phone. A man said, "Stay out of this, or she'll vanish for good." Then he hung up. Helena felt a chill. "Did you recognize the voice?" "No," Mr. Reeves said, voice shaking. "But I'm certain it wasn't Derek Morris or anyone we know." A silent beat passed. Helena locked eyes with Gray, relaying the info. Gray stiffened, speaking under his breath. "He's escalating." After Mr. Reeves ended the call, Helena pocketed her phone. "We need to move faster. If Keith Radner or someone from that security firm is behind this, they might be planning to relocate her." Gray nodded, determination in his eyes. "We'll focus on Radner. If we track him, we track Madeline." Helena couldn't shake the sense that time was ticking down. If the man behind the calls truly had Madeline, each day she remained missing increased the risk she'd never be found alive. "I'll start checking leads on this security firm, see if any old employees can point me to Radner." Gray's jaw clenched. "I'll do the same from this end. Let's bring her home, Monroe." As night fell, Helena stepped outside the station into the swirling mist. The fog pressed in, as if conspiring to hide every clue she needed. But she would tear through it, if that's what it took. Madeline Reeves was still alive, Helena had to believe it, and she'd promised to uncover the man haunting her before the final curtain of secrecy could swallow her whole. Chapter 7. Buried Paper Trails. Morning came with a drizzle that slicked the roads and deepened the haze around Fog Hollow. Helena had spent the night combing through old documents related to Keith Radner's defunct security firm, Granville Asset Protection. Gap. Public records were sparse, but she found glimpses. Hush-hush contracts. References to private enforcement. The faint stench of extra-legal activities. She headed to a rundown office complex, where Gap once rented a suite. The building was a sorry sight. Boarded windows, peeling paint, no caretaker in sight. The company had dissolved years ago, but if Madeline had been involved with them, there might still be something here worth finding. The door to the building was already ajar, swaying slightly in the breeze. Someone had either broken in before her or simply stopped caring enough to lock it. Helena hesitated. Entering would be a grey area. She wasn't law enforcement, but if this was an unsecured property, it wasn't exactly breaking in either. She had learned that useful information rarely fell into her lap by playing it safe. Pushing the door open wider, she stepped inside. The foyer was dim, littered with junk mail. A sign listing old tenants read, Gap, Suite 206 in faded letters. Dust and stale air filled the empty corridors, and the building had the distinct hollow feeling of something abandoned mid-collapse. She moved cautiously up the stairs, the wood creaking under her careful steps. The sign for Suite 206 was faded, the letters peeling. She tried the handle. Unlocked. She exhaled sharply. Someone had been here before. Inside, the suite was a shell of its former self. No furniture, no computers, just an empty space layered with neglect. But in the far corner, a battered file cabinet stood tilted against the wall, one drawer slightly open. Helena approached carefully, half expecting it to be empty. Most of the drawers were, but one held a disorganized pile of papers, some yellowed with age. She sifted through them, scanning for anything that might tie to Madeline Reeves. A few old receipts, scattered notes with scribbled addresses, mostly useless. Then she found a folder with no label. She flipped it open. The contents were cryptic but intriguing. Meeting with MR. Confirm compliance. MR. Madeline Reeves. Possibly. He's paying well for silence. But no name of the paymaster. Relocation next week. The date matched the time Madeline fled Granville. Helena snapped photos of the documents on her phone, knowing full well that anything she found here wasn't admissible evidence. It was simply a trail to follow. If the police wanted to use this in court, they'd need a warrant and a legal chain of custody. A sound outside made her freeze. Footsteps, soft but distinct, moving on the floor below. Her pulse quickened. Was someone else looking for the same information? Had she triggered an alarm, or had the previous visitor returned? She moved quickly but quietly, exiting the office and slipping into the stairwell. She didn't hear the footsteps anymore, but she didn't take chances. Helena took the back exit and made her way to her car, her mind racing. This confirmed Madeline had been involved with Gap in some capacity. Someone had been paying for silence, possibly Keith Radnor's group. The relocation note suggested that Gap had moved people before, including Madeline. But who had hired them? Once in her car, she pulled out her phone and called Detective Gray. "I found references to Madeline in Gap's leftover files," she said, keeping her voice low. "Mentions of compliance and relocation. Nothing I can use in court, but it gives us a direction." Gray exhaled through the line. "That's more than we had this morning. Any names?" "No, just hints. He's paying well for silence, meaning someone with money was pulling the strings." Gray muttered a curse. "We've been running searches on Gap's old clients, but the records are patchy. I'll push harder." Helena glanced back at the abandoned office. "Do it fast. Someone else was inside this building while I was there. I didn't see them, but I heard them." Gray's voice sharpened. "You think they saw you?" "I don't know. But if they're tied to Madeline's disappearance, they might realize I'm getting close." Gray sighed. "I don't like this. Be careful, Monroe." She smirked despite the tension. A little late for that. Hanging up, Helena set her sights on the next step. She needed to find out who had paid Gap to relocate Madeline. If someone had erased the paper trail, they had a reason. And people who cover their tracks this well don't just let loose ends walk away. As she started the car, a single thought burned in her mind. Wherever Madeline was now, she hadn't disappeared willingly, and Helena wasn't stopping until she uncovered who had forced her into the fog. Chapter 8. Closing in. Morning arrived with another swirl of fog blanketing the outskirts of town. Helena grabbed coffee en route to the station, determined to track Keith Radnor's possible hideouts. She found Detective Gray poring over a map in a conference room, red pins marking property sites. He glanced up, relief flashing in his eyes. "Monroe, you're just in time. We cross-referenced vacant properties, old rentals, any place Keith could stash someone. We narrowed it to 4 possible locations within an hour's drive of Fog Hollow." Helena scanned the map. Cabin sites, an abandoned farm, a defunct lodge in the woods, and a run-down motel that recently changed owners. "We'll have to search each. But we need cause. The father can't just wave a warrant into existence, can he?" Gray sighed. "He's trying. Meanwhile, we can do some reconnaissance. See if there's activity that suggests captivity." Helena nodded, grabbing a pin. "I'll start with the old lodge. It's large, off main roads, perfect for holding someone. If you take the farm, we can recon simultaneously." They parted ways, each with a small team of officers. Helena drove her sedan behind 2 patrol cars, the route leading into dense woodland. The old Hillcrest Lodge had gone bankrupt years ago, the caretaker deceased, leaving the property in limbo. It fit Keith's style, a remote place to keep Madeline under the radar. Arriving at a rusty gate, the officers parked. Helena slipped out, scanning the tree line. Quiet. No recent tire tracks that she could see, but the dirt road was rutted and uneven. They advanced on foot, flashlights and caution raised. The lodge loomed ahead, weathered timbers, boarded windows, a wraparound porch sagging under years of neglect. Helena's heart pounded, recalling Darren's warning that Keith might be armed, might not be alone. She gestured for one officer to circle left, another right. She approached the front door, carefully testing the knob. Locked. She crouched to examine the doorframe scratches, possibly from forced entry or older vandalism. No fresh signs. She peered through a gap in the boards covering a front window. Dim shapes of overturned furniture, dust motes dancing in faint light. No sign of current habitation. An officer rejoined her, shaking his head. No footprints around back. Windows are sealed. Doesn't look like anyone's been here in ages. Helena's gut twisted, half relieved, half frustrated. All right. Let's check the interior just in case. They forced the door open. The musty smell of damp wood and decay greeted them. Rooms lay scattered with debris, old chairs, broken fixtures. Each step echoed in the stillness. No captive, no signs of recent occupancy. Helena felt disappointment weigh on her. Back outside, she phoned Gray. "Lodge is a dead end. How about you?" Gray's voice crackled. "Farm's empty too. Heading to the third location, an old motel. Keep me posted." Helena ended the call, returning to her car with the officers. 2 properties down, 2 to go. Time felt like an enemy. Each wasted site was a step closer to Madeline's captors relocating her beyond reach. That afternoon, Gray messaged her. The motel was a bust. Checking the final site, an abandoned cabin near Fog Hollow. Helena breathed a curse. 1 location left. She offered to back him up, but Gray insisted he had enough manpower. Instead, Helena decided to revisit an angle she'd neglected. The father's political ties. Could someone allied with Keith use the father's connections to manipulate the search? She drove back to the station, requesting a quick chat with Mr. Reeves. He arrived, face etched with exhaustion. "Another update? Not good. We've eliminated 3 potential hideouts. The 4th is in progress. Nothing yet." She paused, studying his reaction. "Sir, do you suspect any of your associates might be connected to Keith Radnor or this arrangement?" Mr. Reeves looked startled. "Why would you ask that? Keith's firm once did hush-hush security. Wealthy individuals sometimes hire them for private operations. Is it possible you or someone close to you hired them, not knowing Madeline was entangled?" He reddened. "I'd never hire criminals for personal security. Are you suggesting my circle is behind her disappearance?" Helena raised a placating hand. "Not deliberately, but maybe a friend or colleague used them, inadvertently tying Madeline into their orbit. She might have learned something, become a loose end." His anger cooled to dismay. "I don't know. People in politics do all sorts of shady things behind closed doors. I'll ask around." Helena nodded. "Thank you. Every angle helps." By late afternoon, no word from Gray about the final cabin. Tension gnawed at Helena. What if that location, too, was empty? She paced the station's hallway when suddenly Gray's call came through. She answered with bated breath. "Monroe. We found signs of occupancy at the cabin chains, bedrolls, but no one's there now. It smells like they left in a hurry. We found a hairbrush that might belong to Madeline." Helena felt a surge of hope and dread. "So we missed them? Seems that way. There's tire tracks heading east." We're trying to track that route, but it branches into multiple roads. She clenched her jaw. They're moving her again. If we can intercept the next location, we might save her. Gray sighed. We're expanding the search, but they could be anywhere by now. Shaking off despair, Helena re-centered herself. We'll find a lead. They're not invisible. I'll check Madeline's phone data again for location pings, see if anything correlates with that direction. Keep me posted. Ending the call, she collapsed into a chair, scribbling possibilities on a notepad. Keith had all but confirmed he'd relocate Madeline if threatened. Now the father's phone calls, the public search, the near bust at the cabin all signs they'd flee. Helena needed a lucky break or a crack in the enemy's plan. Because if they found a truly remote spot, Madeline might never be rescued. Her eyes burned with fatigue, but she forced them open. The puzzle's final piece was out there. She'd race the clock again tomorrow, combing through phone logs, retreading the father's ties, interviewing Derek Morris if she could find him. Whoever had Madeline was on the move. Helena was sure of one thing. The next 24 hours were crucial, and she wouldn't rest until she shattered the fog that cloaked Madeline's captors once and for all. Chapter 9. The Final Clue. Morning broke under a pale sun, the persistent fog showing no sign of lifting. Helena was back at the station early, scanning the partial data from Madeline's phone logs. The tech team had managed to restore fragments of her last calls. One number appeared repeatedly in the weeks before she vanished, an unregistered burner. Then, on the day she disappeared, a single 2-minute call to that same number at 9:55 p.m. She tapped her pen on the desk. If that was Keith's phone, it might still ping somewhere. She checked with Gray. He confirmed they ran a trace. No luck. Phone powered off. Another dead end. Time to pivot. Helena decided to chase Derek Morris, the rumoured ex-fiancé. She found a lead on social media. A friend post tagging him at a gym in a nearby town, Redwood Springs. It was a stretch, but any thread was worth tugging. By 10 a.m., she'd parked outside Redwood Fitness, scanning the lot for clues. She had a grainy photo of Derek from older references. Inside, the reception area smelled of disinfectant and sweaty ambition. She flashed a quick detective pass, politely asking the staff if Derek Morris was around. A muscular attendant frowned, then nodded. He's on the weights, 3rd row. She found him bench pressing alone. He fit the old image's tall, lean muscle, a determined set to his jaw. She approached gently. Derek Morris? He paused mid-rep, suspicious. Yeah? I'm Helena Monroe, private investigator assisting the police on Madeline Reeves's disappearance. His face darkened. He racked the bar, sitting up with a scowl. Why ask me? We split over a year ago. Helena studied him. Because we suspect you knew about her fears. She's missing, likely abducted. He snorted, grabbing a towel. That's not on me. I haven't spoken to her in months. Helena pressed. Did she mention a man she was afraid of? Something about Granville? Derek's demeanour shifted, eyes flickering with resentment and a hint of regret. Granville. Yeah, she was living there. She got into trouble, some arrangement, with a private security group. I tried to help, but she pushed me away. What kind of arrangement? He wiped sweat from his brow, hesitation clear. She claimed she was under their protection. I thought it sounded sketchy. When I pressed, she shut me out. That's why we broke up. He shook his head. She said if I meddled, I'd be in danger too. Helena's pulse quickened. Did she name anyone specifically? Not exactly. Just said they were ex-military types, led by a guy named Keith. And they had a bigger boss, a man with money, who demanded her silence. I told her to go to the cops, but she wouldn't. He looked away, guilt etched in his features. So I walked away. Didn't know it'd end like this. Helena softened her tone. Do you recall any mention of a safe house or place they met? He thought for a moment. She once said something about a vantage point near the old Pinecrest overlook north of Fog Hollow. She said Keith favoured meeting spots with quick exits, places near highways. That's it. It wasn't much, but maybe enough. Helena nodded. Thank you, Derek. If you remember anything else, he cut her off. I'll call. Just find her. Back at the station, Helena shared Derek's tip with Gray. He pulled up a map. Pinecrest Overlook is near the highways. Not many structures around, but we can do a drive-by. Helena agreed. If Keith's on the move, he might choose an out-of-the-way spot for an exchange, or to pass Madeline to his client. They mobilized quickly, Helena and Gray in one car, a second squad car trailing. The road to Pinecrest Overlook was winding and partially blocked by fallen branches. As they climbed, the fog thickened, forcing them to slow. Eventually, they reached a clearing with a scenic viewpoint, the valley below obscured by white haze. Gray parked, stepping out with caution. We'll do a quick sweep. The second squad car fanned out, 2 officers scanning the perimeter. Helena moved carefully, remembering the mention of vantage points. If Keith was here, he'd spot them first. The thick fog parted briefly, revealing a silhouette near the guardrail, a figure. Then it disappeared behind swirling mist. She signaled Gray, who nodded and drew his weapon. They advanced silently. Heart pounding, Helena peered around a boulder. The figure stood near the overlook's edge. A man in dark clothing, a hood partially pulled up. Not quite Keith's build. Maybe an associate? Suddenly, the man whirled, spotting them. He bolted toward a black SUV parked near some trees. Gray shouted, "Freeze! Police!" But the figure dived into the driver's seat, gunning the engine. The SUV tore away, headlights slicing through the fog, nearly sideswiping an officer. The second squad car gave chase. Helena and Gray rushed to the spot the man had stood, scanning for any sign of Madeline. Nothing but churned mud, footprints. Then she spotted a torn piece of cloth snagged on the guardrail. Familiar pastel fabric, possibly from Madeline's clothing. She lifted it, dread knotting her stomach. They were here, or he had something of hers. Gray's phone crackled with the pursuing officer's voice. He's heading east, but the road splits. We're losing him in the fog. Helena cursed. The man had planned an escape route. We might never catch him in these conditions. Gray pocketed the phone. We'll keep searching. This confirms they used Pinecrest. Maybe we can glean a direction from tire tracks. Helena exhaled, scanning the swirl of fog. If Madeline was in that SUV, they'd just missed her. If not, maybe she was stashed elsewhere. The emptiness weighed on her. She pocketed the fabric scrap, a tangible piece of Madeline's life. Returning to the cars, they regrouped. The second squad lost the SUV at a fork leading back into the main highway. Another ghost-like escape. The frustration gnawed at Helena. This was the second time they'd been close, only for the captor to vanish. The day was slipping away. Gray tried to console her, but Helena couldn't shake the growing fear. The man had nearly run them over. He was desperate. Desperate men do desperate things. She recalled the battered file from Gap that referenced a relocation, a past event that led to Madeline's disappearance. Drawing a parallel to the current situation, Helena feared that Keith and his men, realizing the investigation was closing in, might now hasten similar plans, potentially doing something drastic to Madeline. By dusk, all leads pointed to a final showdown soon. Helena pored through the notes, the phone logs, the fleeting references to a client. She felt the resolution close at hand, but also an echo of Madeline's terrified whisper. He found me. Now it was up to Helena to ensure that he didn't keep her forever. Chapter 10. Hidden in plain sight. Helena paced the dim corridor of the station well past sundown, the piece of pastel cloth clenched in her fist. She and Gray had scoured Pinecrest Overlook for hours after losing the black SUV in the swirling fog, but no further sign of Madeline or whoever was driving. Now the adrenaline from the chase had worn off, replaced by a cold dread. They were close, yet always a step behind. Gray joined her, carrying a new set of phone records. Still nothing, he admitted, setting the stack of papers on a nearby desk. It's like they vanished into thin air. Helena rubbed her temples, recalling Derek Morris's words earlier that day. Madeline once mentioned a private security group funded by a wealthy backer. At the time, Helena assumed it was a lead on her captors, but the puzzle pieces refused to align neatly. The relocation file from Gap, the references to Keith. Could it be that Madeline was not being held against her will? She glanced at the cloth in her hand, ripped from Madeline's clothing or bag. The question echoed in her mind. Why was it left behind? A younger officer tapped Helena on the shoulder. "Ma'am, phone call for you on line 2. Caller asked for you by name." She walked to the station phone and picked up. A faint crackle broke the silence before a voice spoke low and tense. "Helena, it's Keith." Her grip tightened on the receiver. "Keith Radner." "Where is Madeline?" "She's safe, but you need to stop chasing that SUV. It's only putting her in more danger." Her mouth went dry. "At risk?" "Keith, we're trying to find her." "You don't understand." Keith cut in. "She's not a hostage. Madeline is with a private security team. She staged her own disappearance to protect her from the real threat." Keith paused. "Meet me at Ridgeway Cafe, tomorrow at 7 a.m. "Come alone." He hung up. Helena spent a sleepless night, poring over the puzzle. A year ago, Madeline had confided in Derek about being under some kind of protection, but things had apparently stayed quiet until now. Something must have changed recently, intensifying the danger. By dawn, Helena was sipping an oversweet cup of coffee at Ridgeway Cafe, scanning the street from behind a corner booth. When Keith finally appeared, hooded and tense, he slid into the seat opposite her. "Thanks for coming alone," he murmured. Helena pinned him with a hard look. "I've spent days thinking Madeline was abducted. Now you're telling me she staged the whole thing? She's been in trouble for over a year, ever since she first discovered evidence tying a wealthy magnate to serious crimes. Back then, she tried going to the police. A detective offered to protect her, but it quickly became clear he worked for the same magnate, making sure witnesses stayed silent." Helena's mind reeled. Derek said she told him to stay out of it, or he'd be in danger too. So that's why they broke up. Keith nodded. For a while, the detective basically let her live as long as she kept her mouth shut. She moved around, kept a low profile, hoping to gather enough proof to bring them down. But a few months ago, Madeline uncovered new damning documents, money trails, hush money accounts. When the detective realized she was onto something bigger, he began hunting her in earnest. That's when she decided to reach out to me. She's with the private security detail. People I trust. We moved her to her parents' place initially because it seemed too obvious for a secret hideout. The detective expected her to run far away. Not there. For a while, it worked. The memory of the chase at Pinecrest Overlook flared in Helena's mind. But if she's so safe, why run from us last night? Keith's lips tightened. They saw you and Gray coming in hard. thought you were the detective's men. Her security is drilled to escape at the first sign of trouble. Madeline's terrified that any direct confrontation could expose her location and your involvement. Helena blew out a long breath. So she's been living in her parents' old home, trusting that the detective would never look somewhere so obvious, until those new documents pushed him to track her down again. Keith nodded. Exactly. As soon as she realized how dire it was, we staged the kidnapping. We needed everyone, especially the detective, to believe she'd been taken by force, so he wouldn't suspect she was quietly building her case. That gave her a chance to hide in plain sight. Helena's frustration warred with relief. Madeline's not a hostage. She's in control. But the ache of worry still gripped her. What now? The entire station's investigating a missing person case that isn't exactly real. Keith leaned in. Madeline is in real danger, just not in the way you think. She has enough evidence to crush this detective and his powerful backer, Lieutenant Avery Costello. If Costello catches even a rumor that she's alive, let alone planning to blow the whistle, he'll strike. We need you and Gray to help from inside. Quietly gather any record of Costello's misdeeds, bank accounts, case manipulations. Once we've got hard proof, we reveal her testimony and evidence all at once. Helena stared at him. So we keep investigating, but off the official grid? Keith nodded. Exactly. We have to be careful. If Costello learns you're onto him, he'll vanish. Or worse, retaliate. Sighing, Helena let the anger leak away. Fine. I just want to see her. To know she's truly okay. He leaned forward. You will. But not yet. If we make direct contact now, you could be followed, or forced to file something official that reaches the wrong hands. Help us from your end. Dig up proof of corruption. We think the detective might have doctored reports, maybe even siphoned hush money to hidden accounts. Once we have that, we go public. Blow this wide open. Later that day, Helena returned to the station. Gray noticed the tension in her features as soon as she walked in. In a hushed voice, she relayed Keith's account. How Madeline had discovered new, more incriminating evidence a few months back, forcing the detective's hand. How she'd moved quietly to her parents' house under private security. How the kidnapping was staged to throw off the crooked cop. Gray pinched the bridge of his nose. We've been chasing a phantom kidnapping while the actual threat is inside law enforcement? Lieutenant Avery Costello? Helena murmured. He's the one Madeline's terrified of. Connected to a rich benefactor pulling the strings. We need proof to blow it open. She sorted through the initial missing person reports and found a pile signed by Costello. Look here. The timestamps on witness interviews never matched the official logs. And there's an internal note about large bank transfers that got buried. Gray's eyes lit with an investigator's spark. If he's done that once, he might have done it for other cases. We can cross-check the system logs. Helena clutched the pastel cloth in her jacket pocket, thinking of the nights she spent believing Madeline was bound and gagged somewhere. Instead, her friend had been orchestrating her own covert plan, biding her time. She turned to Gray. Keith wants us to keep this off the record. We find whatever evidence we can, then coordinate a takedown. No tip-offs to Costello's colleagues, no sudden changes in our official reports. Gray nodded, grim but resolved. Understood. Let's do it. They settled at a desk in the far corner, pulling up every case Costello had touched in the past 2 years. If what Keith said was true, that Madeline's new evidence would dovetail with any corruption they discovered, then their best shot was to find the threads tying Costello's name to suspicious patterns. Helena inhaled a shaky breath. Madeline, you've been living on a razor's edge for months. She pictured her friend in a dim house, protected by a security detail, scanning digital files for the final piece of proof. "You're not alone," Helena thought fiercely. "We'll finish this fight together." End of chapter and end of story. To be continued in upcoming story, Veil of Corruption. Like and subscribe to support our channel and to listen to more crime stories and murder mysteries.